This is OBS Radio, a service of OBS International, a division of Greater Works Business Services.
On this week's OBS Talk Show Presents, we will examine a case involving charges given to Alabama House District 52 Representative John Rogers. Representative John Rogers was taken into custody Monday morning after prosecutors said the representative attempted to contact a key witness in an ongoing investigation into alleged kickbacks. In September, Rogers was indicted on 2 federal counts of obstruction of justice. Rogers, and his assistant Very Johnson Kindle, are accused of offering money as a bribe to the unnamed witness to provide false information to authorities looking into a possible kickback scheme. Last week, federal prosecutors claimed Rogers violated the conditions of his bond by attempting to contact the unnamed witness via FaceTime and moved to have Rogers' bond revoked. Prosecutors said the witness did not answer and reported the calls to investigators. The case is part of an investigation into the workings of the Jefferson County Community Service Fund, which the legislature and the Jefferson County delegation had used for community projects. Earlier this year, former Representative Fred Plump of District 55 was indicted with conspiring to direct money from the fund into his Piper Davis Youth Baseball League between March 2019 and April 2023. Plump subsequently pleaded guilty to conspiracy and obstruction of justice charges. Additionally, Kindle is charged with conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and tax charges. Rogers, 82, has represented District 52, which includes Jefferson County, in the Alabama House of Representatives since 1982. A federal judge on Monday ordered longtime Alabama Representative John Rogers to jail for violating his bond by contacting a witness in his bribery case. U.S. Magistrate Judge Stacey Cornelius ordered U.S. Marshals to take Rogers into custody shortly after noon today at the federal courthouse in downtown Birmingham. A federal grand jury in September charged Rogers, a Democrat from Birmingham, with obstruction of justice and obstruction of justice by bribery, alleging that he offered public money to the founder of a nonprofit in exchange for the founder lying to the FBI about a kickback scheme involving public tax dollars. Rogers, 82, has served in the Alabama legislature for more than 4 decades. Federal prosecutors last week asked the judge to jail Rogers, alleging that he violated his bond by FaceTime calling the founder of the nonprofit. I very plainly and clearly instructed Mr. Rogers that he was to have no contact with anyone associated with his case, Judge Cornelius said in court today, noting that she listened to an audio recording of Rogers' arraignment from earlier this month when she explained the conditions of his bond. She also told Rogers' attorney, John Robbins, that the court would provide him with a copy of the transcript of the arraignment and set a hearing on Thursday afternoon. Robbins said that Representative Rogers denies attempting to contact the nonprofit founder, who was identified in court records as individual number 1. You may certainly present evidence on that at the hearing on Thursday, Judge Cornelius said. Speaking on talk radio, just hours before his court appearance, Rogers denied violating the court order. It was an erroneous phone call made by someone, he said on the Gary Richardson Morning Show on WJLD Radio. Rogers also said on the radio that individual number 1 is George Stewart. Stewart is the founder of the American Gospel Quartet Convention, a Birmingham-based music nonprofit that received grant funding from Rogers through the Jefferson County Community Service Fund. When we return, we will examine the kickback scheme that took down an Alabama State Legislature when OBS Talk Show Presents returns. Welcome back to OBS Talk Show Presents. We are examining a 5-year-old financial scheme in Jefferson County, Alabama that involves present and former members of the Alabama State Legislature. In this segment, we will break down the scheme that took down a state legislator. The scheme was complicated, with piles of tax money flowing from Jefferson County to a youth baseball league, then to a dance team, which prosecutors say never performed, and finally into personal bank accounts, credit cards, and mortgage payments. That's according to the case made by federal prosecutors, who reference 3 key people behind the recent scandal. But so far, the prosecutors have charged only one with a crime. Fred Plump last month resigned his seat in the state legislature and pleaded guilty to federal charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. He's scheduled to appear in federal court in Birmingham later this month for sentencing. Now, the details in Plump's plea agreement, as well as AL.com interviews with some of those involved, make clear how it all allegedly worked. The plea agreement, which Plump signed on May 18, references 2 other figures involved in the kickback scheme, legislator number 1 and individual number 1, but doesn't identify them by name. The other legislator mentioned in the plea agreement is Representative John Rogers, who identified himself to AL.com as Legislator Alabama 1 when federal prosecutors announced the charges against Plump. Prosecutors assert, and Plump said in his plea agreement, that the legislator directed tax money to Plump's baseball league as part of the conspiracy. Rogers has repeatedly told AL.com that he did nothing wrong and got no money. The third figure, listed in the plea agreement as individual number 1, is a legislative aide to Rogers. Rogers identified her as his longtime privately employed assistant, Barry Johnson. "I trust her, and whatever Fred and she did, that's their business. I don't know anything about it," Rogers, a Democrat from Birmingham, told AL.com he's supposed to do what he's supposed to do with it. If he doesn't, then he's in trouble. "I guarantee you, I haven't done a damn thing." Johnson has not been charged with wrongdoing. She did not return calls or respond to messages from AL.com for this article. Richard Jaffe, the Birmingham attorney representing Plump in the federal case, said he does not dispute that Johnson is individual number 1 as listed in the plea agreement. AL.com also confirmed that Johnson is individual number 1 in interviews with 3 other sources. While she is not listed as a legislative employee in state records, Rogers told AL.com he employs Johnson and pays her privately to assist him with both public and private matters. "She handles all my affairs, my care and everything," Rogers said. "I pay her. The state does not pay her." Rogers said that sometimes when he is busy or unavailable, he as Johnson handle his legislative business, such as signing his name on paperwork. The 82-year-old legislator said he suffers from hip problems and that Johnson is also his caretaker, driving him around and helping with daily tasks. Plump, a Democrat from Birmingham and longtime youth sports coach, won office in 2022 to serve in the Alabama House of Representatives District 55, beating incumbent Roderick Scott. Federal court records now say Plump, starting about 3 years before he took office, conspired to defraud and obtain money by moving public dollars through his nonprofit and kicking back a portion. The financial dealings began in March 2019 and continued through April 2023, according to Plump's plea agreement. The money came from something called the Jefferson County Community Service Fund, a pool of tax money to support local causes. The fund was created by the state legislature in 2015 to allow the Jefferson County Commission to collect a 1% sales tax and use tax, so local legislators could dole out about $3.6 million annually to schools, libraries, police departments, and youth sports. The fund began giving out grants in 2018. Once a legislator recommends that a group receive funding, a committee reviews and approves the grant. Here's how the kickback scheme worked. Per Plump's plea agreement, legislator number 1, whom Rogers identified as himself, recommended that the fund send money to Plump's baseball league. Plump then submitted falsified budgets to the funds committee, and, once approved by the committee, legislator number 1's assistant delivered the checks from the fund to Plump. Then, according to the plea agreement, Plump wrote a new check for half of the money from his baseball league to the assistant, whom Rogers identified as Johnson. Typically, the checks noted that they were for a dance team or cheerleading, according to the plea agreement. But the assistant did not provide dancers or cheerleaders for league events, and Plump knew she didn't need money for a dance team, his agreement states. In total, Plump wrote 10 checks to the assistant, totaling more than $196,000, according to the plea agreement. The assistant deposited the checks from Plump's baseball league, called Piper Davis, into personal accounts and used the money for cash spending as well as mortgage and credit card payments, the plea agreement states. The plea agreement also says legislator number 1, whom Rogers identified as himself, was to receive a cut of the money. When the committee issued the check to Piper Davis, individual number 1 delivered the check to Plump and Plump wrote a check to individual number 1, the plea agreement reads. Individual number 1 told Plump that they needed half, meaning Plump was to give half of the fund money to legislator number 1 and individual number 1. Plump agreed to pay kickbacks from fund money directed to Piper Davis by legislator number 1, the plea agreement continues. Plump understood that if he did not give half of the money to them, legislator number 1 would not direct fund money to Piper Davis. Rogers recommended roughly 80% of his allocations from the Community Service Fund go to Plump's baseball league, according to the Community Service Fund's records. He did so on forms that required him to certify he hadn't asked for anything of value in exchange for the recommendation and that the funds used would qualify under its legislated purposes. Rogers allocated $497,000 since 2018 and of that, nearly $386,000 went to Plump's baseball league, per the fund's records. After the first year of the fund's disbursements, he only allocated to a few other recipients, Hoover High School, the Alabama Jazz Hall of Fame, and the Birmingham Urban League. It was part of the conspiracy that legislator number 1 would and did recommend during each fiscal year that most of his allotment of fund money be paid to Piper Davis, the plea agreement states. Jaffe said his client, Plump, did not personally benefit from the misuse of the grant money. I've read several accounts that Coach Plump personally benefited from some of these proceeds by putting them into his personal accounts, and that's completely untrue and false, Jaffe told a-l.com. All of the money that he received other than what he unlawfully paid for a dance program he should have known did not exist went into the Piper Davis 501c3 charity for the benefit of minority youth through baseball programs. He did not personally profit a dime, and all accounts that say otherwise are wrong. With his guilty plea to federal charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice, Plump faces up to 20 years in federal prison, plus a fine of as much as $250,000 for each of the 2 charges. Plump agreed to pay back at least $200,000 to the Jefferson County Community Services Fund as part of the plea agreement. As far as broader questions about the scheme, a spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney in Birmingham did not respond to a request for comment. As for the employment arrangement between Rogers and Johnson, legal and ethics experts told AL.com that mixing personal and professional ties presents ethical concerns. Jim Sumner, the retired longtime director of the Alabama Ethics Commission, said that private employees should not conduct public business because they cannot be held accountable in the way government workers are. That would concern me greatly because you would think the public official would want someone who was accountable to the public to be the person who was acting at their behest, Sumner told AL.com. He said it is not unheard of for public officials to have their assistants act on their behalf or even sign on behalf of the official. But it raises ethical concerns, he said, when those assistants are not public employees covered by ethics laws. At the State House, most legislators usually share assistants among a pool of clerks who are publicly employed by the state. But Rogers said he had employed Johnson privately for many years, paying her with his own money to handle both legislative and personal business. Susan Pace Hamill, a professor of law at the University of Alabama, said there is nothing wrong with a legislator hiring a personal valet, under the proper conditions. Problems arise when state money is misused to fund personal needs, she said. If Representative Rogers is really using his own money, the money he earned from his salary as a state legislator or legitimate business on the side, and some of that money is being used to pay for this help, I don't have a problem with that, said Hamill, a former legislative candidate whose legal focus includes ethics. Politicians have access to funds that aren't technically part of the state payroll, but have restrictions on how to use it. When we return, we will continue to examine the 5-year financial kickback scheme on OBS Talk Show Presence. Welcome back to OBS Talk Show Presence. We are examining a 5-year-old financial scheme in Jefferson County, Alabama, that involves present and former members of the Alabama State Legislature. In this segment, we will continue to break down the scheme that took down a state legislator. Elected officials pose with giant checks, shaking hands with constituents and smiling for the cameras as they hand out public money to schools, police departments, and nonprofits in Birmingham and Jefferson County. Now the source of those grants has come under scrutiny after a federal court case revealed a kickback scheme involving 2 state lawmakers, a legislative aide, and a youth baseball league, which prosecutors say resulted in the misuse of thousands of public dollars spent on personal credit card bills and a mortgage instead of its intended community service. For every dollar that local residents and visitors spend in Jefferson County, 1 penny flows into the Jefferson County Community Service Fund, a pool of money for lawmakers to be able to dole out such grants. While a penny might not sound like much, it adds up quickly, accounting for up to $3.6 million each year. It's the old game of pork, and you give these elected officials a chance to say they did something for their constituents, said Natalie Davis, Professor Emerita of Political Science at Birmingham Southern College. That's universal. Since it began handing out grants 5 years ago, the Community Service Fund, acting on the direction of local lawmakers, has handed out more than $16 million to organizations, cities, and nonprofits across Jefferson County. Millions of dollars went to local schools, while hundreds of thousands more went to police departments, performing arts, and public parks. But according to federal prosecutors, at least $197,150 of that public money wasn't used for community service. Fred Plump, the executive director of Piper Davis Youth Baseball League, pleaded guilty in May to federal charges and resigned his seat in the Alabama House of Representatives. In his federal plea agreement, Plump implicated another legislator as part of a conspiracy to funnel public money from the Community Service Fund through his baseball league and into personal accounts. He will be sentenced in federal court in Birmingham on October 23. Plump's baseball league is among the fund's top recipients, according to an analysis of the community service records by AL.com. The committee that oversees the fund and approves funding requests said in an emailed statement to AL.com that its role is to provide accountability and transparency around how legislators issue community service grants. Donna Briggins manages the fund on behalf of the Community Foundation of Greater Birmingham. The committee and the administrators are disheartened by even an isolated instance where the funds may have been used for anything other than their stated purpose, the committee members said in a statement. They have been cooperating with authorities, and they will continue to do their part to promote transparency and accountability with regard to the distribution and use of the Jefferson County Community Service Fund. There has been no indication of any wrongdoing on the part of committee members or administrators, the statement added. Experts and longtime observers of Alabama politics say discretionary funds like this one are common and exist at every level of government, from local neighborhood associations and city councils to the U.S. Congress. In Alabama, state lawmakers from Huntsville to Mobile, Tuscaloosa to Birmingham, have access to discretionary money they can dole out to constituents. Lawmakers commonly argue that they know more about the needs of their individual districts than the full legislature, resulting in the creation of discretionary funds such as the Community Service Fund in Jefferson County, said Jess Brown, a retired political science professor at Athens State University. There's a degree of truth in some of that. But there's a huge political benefit, Brown told AL.com. They in effect get appropriated a chunk of money that they can hand out with substantial discretion. They make the timing of the handout, the venue, and place of the handout typically ripe so they can generate free publicity. Brown also noted that the amount of discretionary spending overall is really a drop in the bucket when it comes to government spending. There's a public good, Brown said. At the same time, there's a political benefit for the individual legislator. At times they've done worthwhile things, but the way the money flows, they also acquire a political benefit from it. Back in 2015, legislators from Jefferson County put together a bill to create the Jefferson County Community Service Fund. The law they passed required the Jefferson County Commission to collect the taxes that supply the fund. Each member of the State House of Representatives from Jefferson County gets to allocate roughly $100,000 in grants each year, while each state senator gets roughly $243,000 to allocate. A committee and its external fund administrator then approve recommendations from the legislators. For example, Republican John Rogers, a Democrat from Birmingham, sent nearly $400,000 of his allocation to the Piper Davis Youth Baseball League, according to the fund's allocations listed publicly on its website. And, according to federal court records and AL.com interviews with some of the people connected to the kickback scheme, Plump, the founder of that nonprofit, funneled public money through the league and kicked back about half of the money to Rogers' assistant. Plump's federal plea agreement says the legislator, identified as Rogers, was part of the conspiracy. Rogers, who said he is the second legislator in the court records, denies that he misused any public funds. Neither Rogers nor his assistant, Barry Johnson, have been charged with any crimes related to the kickback scheme. The federal court case reveals that the kickback scheme continued for nearly 4 years and involved $196,150 that Plump received for his baseball league but instead gave to the assistant. A review of the fund's records shows that Piper Davis is the second highest recipient in the fund's 5-year history. Only the city of Hoover received more money than the small youth baseball league. State Representative Mary Moore, a Democrat from Birmingham, one of the legislators who gets to allocate funding, said the federal charges brought against Plump are evidence that the safeguards work. "You see, he got caught, didn't you? People get caught," she told AL.com. "A crook is a crook is a crook is a crook. You have to deal with honest people." As part of its review and approval process, the committee checks to make sure a recipient agency has filed a 990 tax form with the IRS, a requirement for all nonprofits in the U.S. to disclose their activities, leadership, and finances. But, in the case of Piper Davis, the committee declined to say if it read the contents of the baseball league's tax forms. AL.com found that for the past 5 years, the nonprofit publicly reported less than $50,000 in income annually. Yet, Piper Davis received far more than that from the Community Service Fund alone in 2019-20, 2020-21, 2021-22, and 2022-23, according to the fund's records and the federal court case file. Moving forward, the committee is likely to review its procedures to see whether additional safeguards, if any, can be implemented, the committee said in a statement. Accounting firm Warren Averett has prepared and published yearly reports of the fund as an external auditor since 2018. It tracks that grant funds go to designated recipients and fit within accounting principles. But it doesn't track how the funds are used or audit the tax returns of the recipients of the funds, according to the committee. The firm's general counsel declined to comment, citing client confidentiality. When creating the fund, lawmakers said they were doing so to bridge funding gaps across Jefferson County. Moore originally opposed a bill in the legislature to create the fund, only relenting after legislators added an amendment to give themselves the ability to fund community needs. Most of her allocation goes to schools within her district. "That's when I came and supported the bill, after we came in and made sure we had something to support our schools," Moore said. "I wanted money to go back to where they didn't have to fundraise 24/7. I advocated for whatever we could do to get more money in our schools and into our community so we could see some results." The criteria for the fund require spending on projects that serve a public purpose, support that purpose, financially or otherwise, and benefit the citizens of Jefferson County. Per the legislation, funds can go to the following recipients: public schools, roads, museums, libraries, zoos, parks, neighborhood associations, athletic facilities, youth sports associations, sidewalks, trails, or greenways, performing arts, nonprofit entities that have received funding from the United Way of Central Alabama within the last 12 months, police and fire departments, the sheriff's office, and assistance programs for low-income residents who use the county's public sanitary sewer system. When we return, we will have more on the 5-year financial kickback scheme on OBS Talk Show Presents. Welcome back to OBS Talk Show Presents. In this final segment, I will provide some commentary on the kickback scheme case that affected several members of the Alabama State Legislature. This is a statement from the founder of the Austerlid broadcast section, Keith O. Williams. Remember, this is his commentary only and doesn't reflect the views of OBS News, OBS Radio Networks, and the Austerlid broadcast section. A statement from OBS founder, Keith O. Williams. It was reported that Alabama House Representative John Rogers has been a target of the FBI for over 35 years on various financial schemes and kickbacks. Rogers' latest allegation involves a kickback scheme partnering with former Representative Fred Plump to fund a baseball league. The money was allegedly given to other people. This case spells too much corruption from African American public officials that the trust level among them is slim to none. It's quite disturbing. What's more disturbing is Rogers and his assistant, Barry Johnson Kindle, continue to interact with people on the telephone, on social media, and through terrestrial media outlets. The more they talk, the deeper hole they are digging themselves in. Let's not forget that Kindle who a list of charges on 2 separate cases in which she pleaded not guilty. She is just as in much trouble as Rogers is, yet both of them continue to run their mouths, knowing the feds are watching their every move. Why would someone be subject to targeting by a federal judicial agency? It's beyond insane. Rogers and Kindle need to stop talking, stop engaging on social media, stop calling into radio stations, and skip interviews from radio, television, and newspaper outlets. After all, they have the right to remain silent. Whatever they are saying will probably be used against them in court. They should shut up and let the attorneys handle the conversation. OBS News has learned that Rogers and Kindle had been contacting people by telephone and social media. Many of those individuals said they don't want to have anything to do with them. It was best that the association cease until this case concludes. Some nonprofit organizations, like the Birmingham Urban League, had rejected funding from Rogers, who doesn't want to be a part of the controversy. I can't blame them for that. I would not want to be involved with Rogers or Kindle. Any involvement with the two of them will warrant an investigation. I don't want to be a part of this issue. It was alleged that some other members of the Alabama State Legislature had been thrown in the hat. Whether or not that is true remains a mystery. Representative Gwendolyn Gavan also stuck her nose in this case, stating that the Birmingham Urban League is not a credible organization with its issues of corruption. I don't know if that is true as well. All I know is that in the last few years, several nonprofit organizations in the Birmingham area were involved in money schemes that presented funding to individuals instead of going to the people who needed help. It would be suspicious that the Birmingham Urban League would be associated with financial corruption as a negative narrative. Gavan's claim is the warrant of examination. Another thing that bothers me is that Carlos Chaverst of Chaverst Strategies, who identified himself to reporters as a public relations representative for Rogers, said that the longtime lawmaker mistakenly called Stewart. He said Rogers intended to call his accountant, who has the same last name. First of all, why would a former Birmingham, Alabama now Denver, Colorado resident have anything to do with this case? Is he getting a piece of the pie? Is he being paid for his services performed for John Rogers and/or Barry Kindle? How does he know calling Stewart was a mistake? I am sure the feds investigating this case will want to know Chaverst's involvement in this case, if any. I recommend that Carlos Chavez sit this one out and return to Denver. He doesn't shine a positive light in Birmingham, Alabama with the disruption of several activities including the Hoover, Alabama police shooting of a young veteran, standoff with Hoover police during several protests, and showdowns with Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin. I find it suspicious that Chavez is involved in this case, considering John Rogers is one of his political clients. He's known for attacking activists, advocates, and politicians he feels are not qualified to do their jobs. Chavez is one of several people I recently blocked, because I find their speech and actions questionable. It could be detrimental to the justice movement. I am not sure if I can trust Representative Mary Moore either. She is reportedly known as a fabricated liar, a typical politician with a history of avoiding tough issues. Moore often has a political response to the major issues or a response to an event. She doesn't sit right with the grassroots community also. I am not sure why Moore and the rest of the Jefferson County delegation of the Alabama State Legislature didn't investigate the relationship between John Rogers, Barry Kindle, and Fred Plum before the money was allocated. Was the action done in good faith? Who knows? If I was in that position, I would investigate individuals and organizations before I give away money. In conclusion, be careful of the company you associate yourself with. It's not good to be around certain people because you have no idea what they are doing behind closed doors. It's certainly not a good thing to be friends with politicians. You don't know what they are doing behind your back. They might drag you down and suck you into the goo. It will be difficult to hold them accountable for wrongdoing. Be mindful of who you invite into your personal space. Be careful who you align yourself with. The very people you may hang around with might just suck you down a hole you cannot get out of. A black hole without end. Thank you for that commentary. We welcome all opposing views by commenting on YouTube and Facebook. That will conclude this episode of OBS Talk Show Presents for this week. Be sure to join us next week for another episode. Until then, have a great weekend.
The views expressed on this program are those of the guests and not necessarily the views of management and staff of OBS Radio, OBS International, and Greater Works Business Services. Guests who appear on this podcast are not required to pay a fee and is made possible by radioguestlist.com. For more information, please visit our website at www.obsintl.cf. Follow OBS on Facebook at www.facebook.com/austerlibroadcast-section. If you want to contribute financially to help us continue broadcasting, please go to paypal.me/obsintl. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you next time.
This is a presentation of OBS News, which is responsible for the guests and comments.
This is OBS Radio, a service of OBS International, a division of Greater Works Business Services.